Welcome and or welcome back to my channel. I'm Hannah Blackwell, and today I am super excited to be bringing you a collaboration with a whole bunch of amazing booktubers. We're going to be bringing you some BIPOC book recommendations. Everyone's doing a different kind of video. We have recommendations, TBRs, we have vlogs, that kind of thing. And the whole idea was to bring some love to the BIPOC authors that are in this community that have been making amazing books and bring amazing stories to us, and just highlighting them. Especially, it is Black History Month, and you know what? People might want to erase Black History Month, but we are not going to. We are going to highlight some authors and just bring some love and hopefully get more people reading more BIPOC books. I'm really excited for today's video. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I'd love for you to do so. Don't forget to click the like button and comment down below with some BIPOC recommendations of your own. I've got some different recommendations here from all different people of color and different backgrounds, different styles of writing, different genres. I'm going to start with romance, but I also have some fantasy, I have some horror, and I have some nonfiction as well. So we're going to start with romance because I know that I do primarily talk about romance on this channel. So we're going to start with romance books. So my first book to recommend today is Shannara Williams' Passion and Venom. Now, I think on this book she actually calls herself S. Williams, but it's Shannara Williams, and this is a trilogy. The first book is Passion and Venom, and it is a mafia cartel romance. The trilogy follows the same couple. I've read the first two in the trilogy. I haven't read the last one. I really need to get to that one, but I've really enjoyed the first two books. I read them very recently. It's a cartel romance, like I said, so dark romance, lots of triggers. Make sure you check out your triggers before picking this up because a lot of crazy stuff happens and a lot of triggering things happen. It's very dark, and we have a very morally gray hero, and our heroine's a bit morally gray as well. I really enjoyed this story. I loved the cartel aspect. I had never read a cartel romance before, and I really liked it. I thought the drama and the plot and the excitement was just a lot of fun. It read really quickly. The pacing was really good, really fast paced, and I just liked the drama and the intrigue and thought this was like a really fun ride, and I can't wait to finish out this trilogy. This follows our heroine who is on her wedding day. She's married the love of her life, and then she is taken by the cartel on her way to her honeymoon. Her husband is pulled out of the car and unalived, and she's taken captive. So it's captive romance, and it's a lot of fun. Next, I have an alien romance that I have adored. Again, another series that I want to continue on, and this is Taken to Viraxia by Elizabeth Stevens. So each book in this series follows a different couple. The first book is so freaking good. That's, like I said, Taken to Viraxia, and it's about this woman who's on this moon, and on this moon the women are really mistreated, and they don't have a lot of resources. They don't have a lot of food, and every, I believe, year this group of aliens comes and does a chase where the chase ends in SA. So these women have been through a lot of trauma, a lot of awful things have happened to them, so please check the triggers. Well, when the emperor of this galactic empire shows up to find out, hey, what's been going on this random moon? Why are these resources going there? What's going on? He discovers what's been happening. He's not too happy about it. He also discovers his fated mate because he smells her, and he goes feral. And it's just really good from there. I really liked the character growth. I liked the way they're trying to learn to communicate with each other. I liked how much responsibility the heroine ended up taking on in her new role, and it was such a good time. I thought the writing was impeccable. Very spicy too. So if you're looking for a very spicy alien romance, this is definitely that. I found it to be quite hot, so highly recommend that one. The next I have is a fantasy romance, or you may say monster romance, depending on the book in this series. Now, I'm going to recommend That Time You Got Drunk and Needed a Love Potion at a Werewolf by Kimberly Lemming. But really, this whole series, it starts with That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, but there's 3 full-length books in this series and a novella. I know that Kimberly Lemming has a new sci-fi romance coming out that I'm very excited for. I can't wait for that one. I can't remember when that comes out, but if you know, let me know. But in general, Kimberly Lemming in general is such a fun author to read. She writes these very cozy but spicy fantasy romance, monster romances in this really cute small town that's very like bayou inspired. And there are all kinds of creatures. There's werewolves and demons and like wizards and dragons and shifters. There's all kinds. It's just very inspired, very inspiring. Her writing is so fun too. She brings so much fun humor to her stories that make them just these really fun, adventurous, cozy with higher stakes, but still cozy in the way she's writing these stories. I love Kimberly Lemming so much. I highly recommend checking her out if you haven't. She's just such a great writer, and her books are really spicy too. Another book I've read recently that I would recommend, but I would recommend this book only to people who really like very dark BDSM erotica. Okay, so this is Deviant Secrets by Alicia Ramos. Now, this book is a shorter book. It's less than 200 pages. I read this for my recent Patreon readathon where we were reading novellas for the new year. This is a erotica story about a woman who kind of signs up to be chased by masked men at this cabin, and things go from there. You find out very earlier on that at least one of these men know her, and there's a lot more to this story. There's also a lot of trauma, and you're actually reading some things that have happened to her, like in almost like flashbacks that include SA and a lot of like just really hard stuff. Okay, so check the triggers going into this and know that it's extremely triggering. It is extremely dark. It's also full of basically every kink you could imagine. It's quite bonkers at times, but I did want to include it because I thought that it did what it was trying to do. And I also think this is definitely a book for some people. I enjoyed it. It's not like my favorite of all time, but I definitely got something out of it, and I couldn't not have it on this list. So I do recommend it, but like I said, only if you want to read something that's incredibly dark and full of a lot of kinks and full of a lot of BDSM, okay? But like extreme BDSM, okay? So just putting that out there. Okay, and the next one I have to recommend, I actually have two historical romances to recommend to you. The first one is by Sapna Bog, and this is Dare to be a Duchess. This book was really fun because it was a best friend's older brother who is, I think that he's a duke. I think that's what it was. It's been a little over a year since I read this, but I believe he's a duke. So his best friend's older brother, but they are very much hate to love vibes. Like they don't get along. He doesn't like how mouthy she can be. Like she's got attitude and he just doesn't want any kind of scandal. And it's like a hate to love romance that I thought was just really fun. Like I just really have always loved like best friend's older brother. I think that's just so much fun, and this was a really good one. So highly recommend that one. And then a really good pirate romance that kind of had like reverse roles was Beverly Jenkins' Destiny's Captive. This one, the pirate is actually the heroine, and she's like a Cuban rebel, and this guy who he owns ships or whatever, and he's doing like trading, like she steals his ship, and then he ends up catching her and the two have a romance. This was really fun. I also like that it really had a lot of commentary about what happened in Cuba at this time, about history. Like I like anything that has like a historical commentary or a political commentary, and I feel like Beverly Jenkins does a really good job incorporating history in her romances, like political history and social commentary on that time. She does such a great job with that, and this was no different. I like their romance too. I thought that was really good, and highly recommend. If you haven't tried Beverly Jenkins, like I really liked this one. I want to read more by her because she is such a talented author. Okay, if you're looking for a contemporary short like novelette, like a super spicy short story, I have to recommend Rilzy Adams' 8. And this is about a woman, she's like a career woman, and she just like landed a huge deal. She's like a super successful businesswoman and she wants to celebrate, and so she ends up having this chef come, like a private chef come to make her like a super fancy meal. I think her friend ended up having to not come. I don't know what happened, like her friend was sick or something like that, but she ends up just having the chef come and it's just her by herself. She wants to celebrate and he makes her a super delicious meal. and then he turns her into the meal multiple times, and it is so spicy, so fun, super, super, just a really fun, good time if you're looking for a short erotic like novelette. Another contemporary, but this is a full length, is Get a Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. Talia Hibbert has a few books out, so she's got a backlist, and I know she's very popular, so make sure you check out her backlist too, because she's got a lot of great ones. She's got other books that I really want to read, but this was a really great one. It's got plus size rep. It's also got chronic illness rep. So this is like a hate to love a romance with two people that live in the same apartment building, and they do not get along. They're kind of like off on the wrong foot when he moves in, and things go from there. And it's like a hate to love kind of romance that's just really good. Like, I loved their romance. I loved their communication. I liked the way that he treated her like a freaking princess. Like, I loved it so much. And so that one's really good too. Make sure you check it out. And then I want to talk about some fantasies. Now, these fantasies do have some romance like subplots, especially this first one I'm going to talk about. Actually, the first two, I would say border definitely on Romantasy, but they weren't necessarily like published when Romantasy was as popular of a term. So the first one is This Woven Kingdom by Tahira Mafi. This is a, like I said, I would say Romantasy, but this is YA. And this is like, I believe this is Middle Eastern inspired, if I'm correct. And our heroine is kind of a princess in hiding. Like, she's the heir to the kingdom, but she's in hiding, and she catches the eye of the prince of the ruling kingdom, and they have a romance from there. Now, I have not continued on with this series because I don't really read YA much anymore. So I read this book, gave it 4 stars, enjoyed it, but chose not to continue on because YA is just not where I'm spending my time right now. So I wish I could give you like a better synopsis of this, but I will say this is a very popular YA series. If you are looking for a YA romantasy or a YA fantasy, from what I remember, this was very enjoyable. There's a reason it's very popular. I just personally don't read YA, but I did want to include this on this list so that I have a vast variety of genres so that you can find a BIPOC author to read in any genre you're looking for. Another one that I did enjoy, haven't continued on because I did start the second but didn't love the second one, but I think that you can actually read this as a standalone anyway, in my opinion. I actually really loved this first book. It's Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sulin Tan. I really liked this first book a lot. I gave it like a 4.25, I believe. Really enjoyed it. I loved the imagery. I loved the writing. I liked the story. It is about the daughter of this moon goddess. This moon goddess has been kind of like banished to the moon, and she's kind of like in jail there. Our heroine escapes, and she ends up going to this like academy and running into the prince of the kingdom, and there is kind of a love triangle involved as well. There's adventure and action, and she's trying to like free her mother, and you know, there's political intrigue. There is just so much going on in this, but also, like I said, a love triangle. This is adult, but it reads new adult, if that makes sense, but not spicy. It just reads like a very young for adult, if that makes sense. The second book, I just wasn't vibing with, but I loved the first book so much, so I had to include it. It's so beautifully written. I loved the writing. I liked the story. I liked so much about that first book. It was just, I don't know what happened with the second one for me. Okay, the next book I want to recommend is The Jasmine Throne. Now, this is on my list to reread this year so I can continue on in the series. This is by Tasha Suri. This is a political epic fantasy with a sapphic romance that our heroine is working at this like temple, kind of like guarding the princess who has been basically jailed by her tyrannical brother. And the magic in this kingdom is really interesting. There's like this curse that involves the magic too. It's like this plant magic that kind of like makes plants and vines like grow inside of your skin and like in your body. It's kind of complicated and hard to explain, which is partially why I really want to read it. It's also a very political fantasy too. Like, there's a lot of different playing parts. There's different political players and regions that all have their own different agendas, and so there's a lot going on in this. That's why I want to reread it before I continue on, but this is such a good fantasy. So if you're looking for a BIPOC political epic fantasy, especially if you want to read more sapphic books, this is a great one to pick up. Another Middle Eastern inspired fantasy is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty or Shannon Chakraborty. I've read the whole trilogy and I absolutely adored it. This is a political epic fantasy. It is Middle Eastern inspired. It's about jinn, and we have our heroine who is kind of tricking people out of money, faking some magic, we'll just say. Anyway, one day she accidentally summons a jinn and all hell breaks loose. And she ends up on her way to Davidbad, which is like this city that she didn't think existed. It's like this magical city. And she just finds out so much about the world, and there's just like so much going on. It's so good. It's so political. There are so many really cool creatures. I love how inspired by mythology this book was too, or this whole series really, and I loved it. I loved this whole series. I'm really glad I finished it out, and it's such a good time. So if you are looking for some more epic fantasy to pick up, but by BIPOC authors, S.A. Chakraborty is so good. She's such an amazing writer. Okay, so we're done with the fantasy, but I do have a couple of horror or thriller books to talk about. Specifically, these three. I have more, but I wanted to pick these three because they all have a social and political commentary. They have something else they're saying to them that is in relation to like racism and minorities and mistreated minorities. So the first one, and also like historical commentary as well. So the first one is When the Reckoning Comes by Latanya McQueen. This is one of the best horrors I've ever read. It is very short. I think it might technically constitute as a novella, if I'm correct. I think it does constitute as a novella. It might be in the 200-page range. This is a book about a wedding that is taking place at an old plantation that is said to be haunted, okay? It is a lot more complicated than that, and I can't say too much because, like I said, it's quite short, and I think really saying too much else would be a spoiler. It says so much about racism in the South. I just have to say that. It also, I think, was such an interesting, it was just such an interesting and unique story that was so impactful. Please read this book if you haven't. If you get in a horror mood, pick this one up. It's one of my favorite horrors of all time, and it was so incredibly impactful. It said so much in such a short period of time, but was also quite terrifying. And I get really upset too. There's so many people that say like, this book wasn't a horror, this wasn't scary. Maybe check your white privilege for why you don't think that book is scary, because it was absolutely terrifying. And I think if you don't think it's scary, there might be an issue. That's my own personal opinion. The next book I want to talk about is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Now, this is another one that has a lot of racism in terms of the family that our heroine goes to stay with. So she basically she lives in Mexico. This is in the, I believe it's in the 50s, and she gets a letter from her cousin saying that she has found the perfect man and she has moved to his estate. But then she says that she is dying, or that he's like unaliving her or poisoning her. It's really creepy. And then she says, oh no, just kidding, I just have tuberculosis. Things are weird. Things are like questionable, and she decides to go check it out and find out like, hey, what's actually happening to my cousin? And when she gets there, she meets his family, like her cousin's fiance's family, and oh my goodness, they are awful. I don't want to say too much more, but they're awful. Also check your trigger warnings. This is a really good book, like I said, that has a lot of commentary as well. Another one is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This is another one that is absolutely terrifying, and I would say is more thriller horror, though I hear a lot of people react to this very similarly to When the Reckoning Comes, saying that it's not scary, not suspenseful, like what, it was boring. I think maybe check your white privilege for that too, because now, and I get it if you just don't like it because maybe the pacing or whatever, but when someone says this wasn't scary, this wasn't in a situation like this, I think that's an issue, and I think that's an opportunity to learn, maybe. So this one is about this neighborhood that is going through gentrification, okay, and the horrors that could maybe ensue from there. and it's a thriller. There is also a romance in this one. So if you want to get into thrillers or suspenses, but you like a romance, like you're a romance reader, check this out because there is a good romance subplot in this one. And then finally, I just have two authors that I want to highlight for their political commentary and for their wonderful writing. One is Nikki Giovanni, specifically Cotton Candy on a Rainy Day, but she has so many works. She is a poet, and she is a poet that I have been reading since I was a kid. My mother was a huge fan of hers, and she writes poetry about sexism and racism. And she started, I think in like the 70s maybe. She's a wonderful poet, and she just has so much to say, especially on the topics of sexism and racism. And she is just incredibly talented. So if you're looking for a new poet to check out Nikki Giovanni. She's one of my favorites of all time. And then also Ta-Nehisi Coates. I read Between the World and Me and was forever changed after reading this book. It is a nonfiction in the style of like him talking to his son, which is really unique. And it's just about trying to explain to his son the fights that have been fought and where we are now and where we are going, and just trying to talk to his son about these issues of racism in America and what he has been through. And it's just so good. It's so incredibly good. So well written, but specifically I would highly recommend the audiobook for that one because he does narrate the audiobook and he writes in a very lyrical way that is just so impressive. I actually have his newer book out from the library right now, and I'm very much looking forward to reading that one because it specifically actually talks about Palestine. It talks about Africa, Palestine, and it talks about the South, like racism in the South, I believe. It's kind of like in 3 parts. And I'm highly, highly looking forward to reading that one too. So Ta-Nehisi Coates, a wonderful, wonderful author too. If you are looking to learn more, educate yourself, and read more BIPOC authors, but maybe in a nonfiction manner, highly recommend Ta-Nehisi Coates. So there you have it. Those are my BIPOC recommendations for you guys today. I hope you liked this video. I hope you had a good time. Please drop your BIPOC recommendations for me below in the comments. I would love to hear from you, and that way we can all share BIPOC recs for each other to pick up more BIPOC authors. And it is Black History Month, so what better time to do this? But I think it's also important to point out we all need to do a better job about doing this not just in Black History Month, right? Like, we need to be celebrating authors that are not just white throughout the year. And you know, that's something I can improve on. That's something that I need to do better with. And I think that's something that we can all improve on. And so I'm starting now, but I do want to try to do better also in the future. But here are a few that I definitely recommend. Once again, if you haven't subscribed, I'd love for you to do so. And don't forget to click the like button. Until next time, fellow readers, keep reading and living your best life. Guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to